Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Evangelical Alliance Ireland. I'm Nick Park, and this week I want us to look at the prophet Samuel, one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. Years ago, there was an Irish-American historian called Thomas Cahill who wrote a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. Absolutely brilliant book if you've never read it. And it was designed to be one of a series of 7 books that were the hinges of history. Whenever one phase in human history moved irreversibly into something else, and the events that caused that change to take place. And the rise of the Irish Church was one of those. Now, Thomas Cahill died after only completing 6 of his 7 books. But I've always thought that when you look at the Bible, you can see 10 great ages of mankind when viewed from God's perspective. You have, first of all, from the creation of the world up until Genesis chapter 12. And then you have Abraham, and that's the beginning of the patriarchs, which sort of ends up with Joseph. And then you have the period of slavery in Egypt, and then the 4th great age of mankind is Moses, the deliverer, and Joshua leading the people into the promised land. Then you have the judges, whenever everything was just confused, and God raised up judges, but people did what was right in their own eyes, really. Then you have the time of the kings of Israel and of Judah. And then you have, after the Babylonian captivity, those post-captivity years with Ezra and Nehemiah. And then you have the 400 silent years from whenever the last of the prophets, Malachi, prophesied until John the Baptist appears on the scene, and we move into the time of Jesus. And then, of course, after Jesus, we have, after the day of Pentecost, we have the church age. That's the 10th great age of mankind from God's perspective. And the 11th will be the return of Christ and all eternity existing after that. And when you look at these great ages of mankind from God's perspective, there are hinges that move us from one to the other. And Samuel is one of the hinges of God's history, moving us from the time of the judges into the time of the kings. God moves from one phase to the next, but God uses people. And God uses people who are dedicated to God. And really, in Samuel, you see somebody who is dedicated to God, even as before he was born. His mother praying for a child, Hannah praying for a child, and God gave her the child. And she said, if you give me this child, he will be dedicated to God from the moment he's conceived in the womb. And that was the child, Samuel. So there was prayer. She prayed to God, and that brings about dedication. And then, of course, there was praise. That when you read 1 Samuel chapter 1 and 2, then she just launched, she launched into this prayer of praise for God answering her prayer. And then there was sacrifice as well. The fact that she allowed this son, who she'd so prayed for and so longed for, to be totally dedicated to God, and even as a little boy to go and to live in the temple and to serve God, or in the tabernacle, to serve God in the tabernacle. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and 2, we see this boy Samuel, because of prayer, because of praise, and because of sacrificial attitude, that he becomes totally dedicated to God. And he becomes somebody who would be one of those hinges of God's history, moving God's dealings with mankind from the time of the judges into the days of the kings, starting with King Saul and King David. You know, we live like Samuel. We live in a time of great transition. The world is changing. Things are changing all around us. And when we're living in changing times, we still need people who are dedicated to God. And still, the only way I know that God, by his grace, raises up dedicated people is by prayer, is by praise, and is by sacrificial giving of ourselves, our families, everything we are, into the service of God. And so I want to encourage you today, if you want to be used by God in a changing time in which we live, then we need to be dedicated to God, and we need to raise up people who are dedicated to God. We need to be people of prayer. We need to be people of praise, and we need to be people who are prepared to make sacrifices in the service of our God and our Lord. And I would urge you today to follow Jesus with all of your heart. And join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5 minutes inspirational message from Evangelical Alliance Ireland.